Good afternoon, everyone. If I can just get your attention, I think we're going to start with today's proceeding right now. Before we formally begin with the Café Scientifique, we'd just like to respectfully acknowledge that UBC, Okanagan, and Interior Health is situated on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. And personally, I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to live, work, and raise a family as well on these lands. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us to the 8th annual Embrace Aging event. Now, as many of you know, Embrace Aging was launched 8 years ago to celebrate and raise awareness about positive aging. And like in past years, a wide range of events have been organized during the month of March. The sessions are designed for everyone, young and old alike, and focus on a variety of topics related to healthy aging. And the goal is to inspire everyone to embrace positive aging. My name is Brody Sakakibara. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy at UBC in the Faculty of Medicine. And on behalf of the co-hosts, the Institute for Healthy Living and Chronic Disease Prevention at UBC Okanagan, the Aging in Place Research Cluster of Excellence, also at UBC Okanagan, and Interior Health, welcome to this year's Café Scientifique. And this year's Café Scientifique is going to focus on a concept that I think is important to many people, which is called aging in place. And we have a panel of experts today that are going to talk about aging in place from their discipline. So we have a multidisciplinary panel of experts that is going to talk about their perspective on aging in place. Now, as you all know, the world's older population is growing at an unprecedented rate. By 2050, 2 billion people are expected to be 60 years of age or older. In 2015, the number of persons aged 65 years and older exceeded the number of children, 0 to 14, for the first time ever. Canada is considered to be one of the super aging countries, one of 13 super aging countries around the world. And over 1/3 of older adults aged 65 years of age and older are living in senior care facilities. Most older adults, as we know, want to stay in place in their homes as they grow older. And this phenomenon is what we're going to talk about today, aging in place. Yet trouble getting around, loss of balance, declining health, often require moving to an institutional setting. So supporting older women and men to age in place is even more pressing today, considering that Canada is a super aging country. The World Health Organization has identified aging well as a #1 global priority and challenge. A primary aspect of aging well is the concept of aging in place, which, as I mentioned, involves remaining in one's home of choice, safely and comfortably, regardless of your age. In fact, 83% of Canadians have reported their preference to age in place, keep living at home and paying for supports as needed rather than in an assisted living facility. Yet there is little research and information on how to make aging in place possible and how to optimize aging in place for older adults. And I think experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic have further underscored the need to reimagine the ways in which we support older adults and the value of remaining in one's home. And so to discuss this aging in place phenomenon in greater detail, we've convened a panel of experts from multiple disciplines to discuss the aging in place concept from their diverse perspectives. Okay? Now, before we begin with the formal presentations, there's just a couple of ground rules here that I'd like to speak to. So each presenter will have 10 minutes to talk about aging in place from their discipline. There is note paper and pens on your table. Feel free to use this paper to jot down notes, jot down questions that you may ask after the end of the presentations. Following the presentations, we'll take a short 10-minute break for you to go to the washroom, grab a beverage. But we'd just like to note that if you do get up from your table, we're still in COVID, so please put on your mask if you get up from your table and wander around, okay? After the break, we'll reconvene, and this will be your opportunity to ask the panelists questions that you've noted. We will use a microphone so everyone can hear, and we will have runners who have microphones in the audience to pass the microphone from one audience member to another, okay? Now, before we close the cafe at around 6 p.m., I'm going to invite each of the panelists to provide some closing remarks and reflect on their discussion today and reflect on some of the questions that you've had in the discussion that we had. We also will provide evaluation forms. These evaluation forms, normally, pre-COVID, they would be on your table. But right now, the organizers of this Café Scientifique will email you the evaluation form. And it would be greatly appreciated if you completed that evaluation form and submitted it, okay? We will be taking a few pictures of the event tonight. So if you don't want to be included in the pictures, just please let us know. And Joan has raised her hand. If you do not want to be included in the photo, just let Joan know, okay? Thank you. So, with that said, and without further ado, let's get started. And I'm just going to introduce each of the panel members. And so first up, we have Miss Tiana Broen. Tiana. Tiana is a Master's of Science student in the health psychology at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. So she's made her way up here, and we're very grateful and excited to have her here. Her research focuses on health behaviors such as physical activity in older adulthood, and also on how psychological factors such as loneliness and social support influence health behaviors. She is currently a part of the Health and Adult Development Lab at UBC, working with the Neuromuscular Healthy Exercise and Aging Lab at UBC Okanagan on the Aging in Place project. There's been a slight change to the panel tonight. We had a family physician, her name is Janet Evans. Unfortunately, she's not able to join us today. And so in her absence, I've decided to present a little bit on my perspective of aging in place. And so as I mentioned, I'm Brody Sakakibera. I'm faculty in the Department of Occupational Science, Occupational Therapy in the Faculty of Medicine at UBC. I'm also an investigator with the Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Management here at UBC Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Management at UBC Okanagan as part of the Southern Medical Program. And I'm also an investigator with the Aging in Place Center of Excellence. And here at UBC Okanagan is where I conduct my research. My research focuses on chronic disease prevention and management, particularly in people who've had a stroke and heart disease. And I also do some health services research focusing on the uses of consumer technologies for the delivery of health and rehabilitation services to people in their homes and communities. After my discussion, Ms. Lisa Ha will present on her perspective of aging in place. Lisa is a PhD student under supervision of Dr. Brian Dalton at UBC Okanagan in sensory-motor control. She's in the Health and Exercise Science school. Her specialties include sex-related differences in young and older adults in balance and muscle weakness. Her goal during her PhD is to understand sex differences in aging muscle adaptations that may occur in balance, which could aid in preventing fall risk in older adults. And last but not least, we have Dr. Jennifer Boger. Dr. Boger's research focuses on creating technologies that enable more inclusive, equitable, and personal health support for personal supports for health, well-being, and quality of life for older adults. Her research team engages in transdisciplinary collaboration and human-centric design practices that blend state-of-the-art knowledge from computer science, engineering, and health sciences to create internationally renowned, intelligent, assistive technologies for supporting graceful aging. She's also spearheading the concept of ethical by design, which involves the systematic development of a methodology to enable disparate stakeholders to collectively build aspects such as ethics, culture, and citizenship into products and systems throughout their lifestyle or life cycle. And if you have any questions about that bio, you can ask her during the question period. So, without further ado, that's your panel for tonight at today's Café Scientifique. And so let's begin then with Tiana Broen.
Awesome. Maybe. Hello? No. Oh, yes. Okay, there you go. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. My name's Tiana, and I'm going to be speaking a little bit about my research interests today, which are in psychology, specifically in health psychology. And I look at physical activity as a health behavior in older adulthood. So to get started, I do have a little activity for us, which is totally optional, but if you want to use your smartphones, you can see that there's a little sheet of paper on the table. It has a QR code and a website. If you want to go to it, I've set up a single question in there, and the question is just, what does physical activity mean to you? Yeah, so if you want to go ahead and try that out, you can put in as many answers as you would like. You can put in a single word or a couple words, a phrase that comes to mind about physical activity, how it makes you feel, the kinds of activities you do, or anything else associated with physical activity. And as you enter your answers, you'll be able to see on your phone that a word cloud is created, where the bigger words just means that more than one person has entered that word, and I can also see it from my end and just see what kind of activities people do. So I can see on my phone that people are entering their activities, that it makes them feel happy. They do things like exercise, yoga, bike, resistance training, getting fresh air, all these different things. So this is just kind of to get you thinking and show that people have different ideas of physical activity. But right now, the Canadian Physical Activity Guidelines recommend 150 minutes of aerobic activity per week. So this is 2.5 hours of anything that gets your heart beating faster, in addition to 2 days of muscle strengthening activities, which is just anything that works your muscles more than usual. So this is a really good guideline, but also I wanted to use this activity to show you that things that we might not typically think of as exercise or physical activity still count towards meeting those activity guidelines. So things like gardening, walking to get the mail, getting your groceries, all those different things. So I just wanted to do that activity to get us thinking about what gets you moving on a day-to-day basis and how you stay active in your community. So next I want to talk a little bit about why we as researchers care about physical activity. So it's one of the most studied health behaviors in health psychology, and we know that it supports both psychological well-being and physical health. We also know that physical activity is really important for maintaining independence with age, so in order to age in place, which is what today is about. So although this might seem straightforward, we actually know that only about 21% of older adults meet these Canadian physical activity guidelines. And so understanding that such a small percentage of older adults meet these guidelines, one of my main research goals is to examine what kinds of barriers to physical activity people encounter in their everyday life and how we can support individuals in minimizing these barriers. So to better understand this, in my research, I look at different barriers to physical activity in order to close what we call the intention-behavior gap. So this is probably a concept that all of us are familiar with. For example, I might have really good intentions every morning to go take my dog for a walk to get my physical activity, but before I know it, I'm sitting behind my computer screen doing my work, and I let my dog on my patio, and I didn't get that exercise. So that would be a barrier to me doing my physical activity. Other things can also act as a barrier, things like pain, the weather, or even just things like scheduling conflicts. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, I was part of a research study at UBC Vancouver where we looked at physical activity and barriers to physical activity in the context of the pandemic. So two of the factors that I was most interested in looking at were loneliness and pain. So interestingly, as a result of this study, we didn't find that pain had any impact on physical activity behaviors, but we did find that on days when people reported feeling more lonely, they took fewer steps that day and also did less exercise. So this is, again, just one example of a barrier that may stop you from doing physical activity that you intended to do. So in our research, how do we measure physical activity? So we know that people vary quite a bit from one another in their physical activity behaviors. We know that just from the little activity we did at the beginning here, that people have all different kinds of ideas of what it means to engage in physical activity. But my research really aims to extend this and also look at what makes a person's experience vary from their typical. So in other words, what differentiates a good day from a bad day? So to do this, we use a method that is called repeated daily life assessment, and it's a big word, but all it means is that we're really looking to get a snapshot into participants' daily lives. We usually ask them to complete questionnaires every day and then measure things like physical activity using Fitbits or smartwatches over a period of around 7 to 10 consecutive days. And like I said, this really lets us get a snapshot into the daily lives of our participants and really understand what kinds of interventions on a day-to-day level would most support them in their health behaviors like physical activity. So one method that I am really excited to share with you today is called the photo voice method. So this is something that, as the name indicates, we use photographs as a tool to allow participants to tell us what's important in their daily life. So right now in the Okanagan, we are using this method as a part of the Aging in Place study, which is an active data collection, and we do have a little sheet on the table that kind of describes that study a little more. So in this study, we give participants iPads to use and ask them to take photographs of different things that they would consider either a barrier to physical activity or a facilitator to physical activity for 10 consecutive days. We then supplement this with objective activity data from Fitbits and Garmin watches, and it allows us to really get a deep understanding of what people are doing for physical activity in their daily lives. So we are an active data collection, as I've said, but we have seen some really interesting pictures so far of things like weather that's either really beautiful out and it acted as a facilitator to people engaging in physical activity, or weather that is not so great and it maybe caused the sidewalks to be slippery and they didn't go outside to go for their walk. There's also things like a lot of home gym setups from COVID and also social support, so people taking photos of going for walks with their partners or friends or pets. Yeah, so this is just a method that we are using, again, just to really highlight that we're interested in your experience and we don't necessarily want to limit our understanding of your experience in your own communities with multiple choice questionnaires. So like I said, we are in active data collection at the moment, and there is a little sheet on the table if you want to take a look and read a bit more about it. There's also some contact information if you're interested in participating. We're always interested in having people tell us about their experience in their communities. Yeah, and that's all I have right now for my little talk. Thanks for letting me chat about my research a bit, and yeah, I'll pass the mic on to the next person.
Thanks, Tiana. Yeah, and Tiana, you could just pass the mic to Lisa. Next up in the lineup is me. So I will provide my discussion here. And don't forget, you have a sheet of paper on your table. Feel free to jot down your thoughts and questions so you don't forget them when we enter the Q&A. You have to forgive me. I've taken copious amount of notes here to help guide me through this presentation in a logical, smooth flow, given that I'm a sort of a last-minute replacement here. But generally, my discussion focuses on access to health and rehabilitation services, and specifically on the uses of technology for the delivery of health and rehabilitation services to people in their homes and in their communities. And this is otherwise known as something called telehealth or telerehabilitation, or you might have heard the terms virtual health or virtual rehabilitation. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because I think it's a contentious topic right now. As you know, there's been quite a bit of discussion about some of the plausible advantages of using technology for the delivery of health and rehabilitation services to people in their homes and communities. But lately, I've noticed, there's also discussion on the flip side, where people experience frustration and identify some of the disadvantages and barriers that they experience using technology for the provision or for receiving health and rehabilitation services. And particularly on the flip side are people who have actually gone through using telehealth or virtual health or virtual rehabilitation. And so I think, I'm hoping that we can have a fulsome discussion on this topic, and please do take notes and ask questions afterwards. And so as part of this discussion, I have two things that I'd like to quickly discuss. One is on virtual rehabilitation post-COVID-19, and specifically how COVID has impacted clinical perceptions and uses of technology for rehabilitation and health purposes. And the second component of my presentation, I'll take you through an example of a telehealth project that we recently completed in the past couple of years. And so with the first, virtual rehabilitation post-COVID, or what has changed in the virtual rehabilitation landscape since the onset of COVID-19. And I think COVID-19 has changed many things in virtual rehabilitation. And one overarching consideration that I'll discuss today is that there's been a substantial increase in both the use and interest in virtual rehabilitation from clinicians as a plausible solution to provide rehabilitation while adhering to provincial and national orders of physical distancing to prevent viral spread of COVID-19. And to substantiate this, there's been a couple of surveys with results recently released. And these surveys were specific to physical therapy clinicians, but really I think the results of these surveys are consistent and reflective of the thoughts of other health professionals. Now, one survey was called the COVID-19 Quick Canadian Physiotherapist Survey, and this was conducted by investigators at UBC. And the purpose of this survey was to better understand the state of physical therapy practice in Canada during COVID-19 and understand how PTs are adapting their practice to continue to treat. And this was a bi-weekly survey of physical therapists from across Canada that was administered between May and October 2020. In the first cycle, so the survey administered in May, there were almost 2,000 respondents, 1,972 respondents. And in the last cycle that was administered in October, there were just over 403 responses. Now, when asked these physical therapists how they are adapting their practice, 79% reported transitioning to using virtual rehabilitation. And in the last cycle, in October, although a smaller sample, still 51% reported using virtual rehabilitation. And interestingly, 84% of these individuals, of these therapists, indicated that they'll continue using virtual rehabilitation after the end of the pandemic. Okay? Now, another survey on a similar topic was completed by the Ontario Physiotherapy Association, where they surveyed their members on their experience implementing telerehabilitation during COVID-19. Of the 365 respondents, almost all of them transitioned to using virtual rehabilitation. And what's interesting is that, and has important implications moving forward, is that the same percentage of respondents also reported no previous experience with virtual rehabilitation. And so these therapists were providing a therapy using technology when they've never done that before. And this has important implications as we move forward. Sorry. As well, of the respondents in this Ontario survey, 64 to 96% of the respondents reported that they will likely continue using virtual rehabilitation post-COVID. So they'll continue using technology to deliver rehabilitation services. And so I think what these two surveys provide is, I think there's strong indication that virtual rehabilitation is becoming more established in clinical practice, and that it is a model of clinical rehabilitation that will continue to be used either as a standalone service or in combination, or a hybrid service in combination with in-person therapy, okay? So this is the sort of the state where we are right now with the use of technology for delivery of health and rehabilitation services. And I would love to hear thoughts about this and your perspective, even some of your experiences possibly. Second, now I'd like to discuss an example of a telehealth coaching project that one of my master's students recently completed in the past couple of years during COVID-19. And just as background to this project, so we are faced with many strategies to prevent viral spread of COVID-19. Ongoing strategies such as quarantining, social and physical distancing, and closure of public facilities, right? While important for preventing transmission of COVID, these strategies are also shown to have negative impacts on our ability to manage our health and wellness, right? Some of us probably have experienced that. For example, social and physical distancing are associated with poor mental health, increased stress, and this poor mental health, in turn, are also shown to be associated with increased risk of heart disease and stroke onset. As well, closures of public areas, they're shown to act as barriers to exercise as well as dietary quality. For example, closures of grocery stores may lead people to buy food from fast food restaurants via their drive-thrus. And so the issue of COVID are widespread and not only directly related to the virus itself. And this is what we're going through right now. Now, in recognition of these secondary issues of COVID, we developed a chronic disease prevention and management program to help adults 65 years of age and older to better manage their health and well-being in the context of COVID-related restrictions. And the title of this project was a student-delivered community outreach telehealth program for COVID education and health promotion, otherwise known as COACH. And this program was delivered via telephone and video conferencing technology by trained medical undergraduate students at UBC. Now in COACH, participants received what's called a self-health assessment, where they were able to self-identify any health behaviors that they felt they could improve upon. And participants also received 6 coaching sessions over a 2-month period with a trained medical students, many students of whom were from the Southern Medical Program here at UBC Okanagan. Now, the essence of the coaching sessions were to reflect on the self-health assessment and collaboratively identify behavioral goals to work towards, as well as the student coaches help the participants to develop short-term action plans that the participants could follow in between coaching sessions. And these action plans were really, developed and aimed towards realizing the participants' longer-term health behavioral goals, as identified in that self-health assessment. And so this study was conducted between June 2020 and January 2021. We recruited 75 participants throughout BC, and this was a single-group pre-post study. In other words, we collected data on participants before enrolling them in the COACH study, and then we brought back the same participants and administered the same measures or evaluations after they had completed their participation in COACH. We then analyzed the data and looked for any changes by comparing the pre-data to the post-data. And what we found was that there were statistically significant improvements in the participants' health-directed behaviors, and so participants were actually doing better things to promote their behavior. And also participants had a increased health promotion self-efficacy. And so individuals had a greater belief in their ability in promoting their own health. As well, we observed a significant decline in mental health status. And so people reporting higher levels of mental health issues after the end of the program. And to us, this wasn't all that surprising, considering that the study was done during COVID-19. In the context of social isolation, social distancing, as well as physical distancing issues. And so the results of the study suggested that health coaching by medical students in the context of COVID-19 restrictions delivered via video conferencing technology may help people improve their ability to perform health behaviors, their belief in their ability to promote their own health, all while experiencing issues associated with stress, anxiety, social isolation, and perhaps even depressive symptoms. And so it was an interesting finding in this quick little study that my master's students did over the past couple of years. And that concludes my discussion. Thank you. And I will, thanks. And up next we have Lisa.
Hello. Sorry. A little bit too close. Like Brody said, my name is Lisa, and my area of interest is sex-related differences, and I wanted to see how that extends into older adults, so aging. So what are sex differences? So what it is comparing males and females on their differences on how they execute either exercise or how they biologically metabolize things. So there's two main things that people talk about when they're referring to sex-related differences. The first one is hormonal differences. So males typically have more testosterone than females, and females have more estrogen. And that leads to difference in fat and muscle mass distribution on the body. So that's why females, we have wider hips, and males typically have more muscles. The second thing that is discussed often is performance variables. And what I mean by that is fatigability, so how long they can execute an exercise, or strength, or power. And when I'm talking about strength, I'm referring to how much force is exerted. And when I'm referring to power, it's how quickly you execute that force. So that's really important to understand what power means, is because when you're referring to resistance training, a lot of people refer to it as lifting heavy, and that's not necessarily the best suited outcome depending on your needs. And so why am I telling you all of this? Why is this applicable to older adults? It depends. It depends on what you're looking for your outcome, if it's your quality of life, if you're trying to hold a bag of groceries, if you're trying to walk upstairs, or hold on and keep up with your grandchildren. So it depends on what your outcome or what your outcomes are needed to train the body. So what I mean by that is with strength, if you're strength focused, incorporating strength in your exercises with resistance training, then you're lifting a lot, but that is overall health. So that'll improve everything about the body, your muscle mass, your cardiovascular health. So strength is still very good for you. But what research has recently found is that with power, it's directly improving function. And what's function? It's being able to do acts of daily living. So if you're trying to make walking up the stairs a little bit easier, or you're trying to get out of a chair a little bit quicker, or keep up with your grandchildren just like walking in a mall, then power is more for your training than strength is. And I'm not saying take your grandchildren and pick them up as quickly as you can, but this is just an idea that when you're thinking about lifting weights, it's not necessarily about the load, but how quickly you may execute it. So if power equates to better quality of life, then it can improve your balance. It can improve your ability to catch a fall, so decreasing your fall risk, thus increasing your quality of life and being able to live independently and safely longer. So as Tiana said earlier, the Canadian Physical Activity Guidelines say 2.5 hours of aerobic exercise per week, and that can be divided based on your needs. If you're a busy person, you can match that with doing 30-minute intervals, or you can do 10-minute intervals as long as you meet that 2.5-hour guideline per week. And then they also recommend two times per week to do resistance training, but they don't really specify if it's strength or power based. So I just wanted to ask you guys a few questions here, get some audience encouragement here. So how many of you guys would like to live as long as possible and independently and safely as possible? Okay, I was going to be very concerned if there was a few of us that did not raise our hands. Yes. So those that have raised their hands, we can keep them up. A little exercise for us. So of us that are raising our hands, how many of you guys have issues keeping up with your grandchildren or walking upstairs or getting out of a chair? And those that still have their hands lifted, how many of you guys meet the guidelines? It's really hard to meet those guidelines because as modern life, we have jobs, we have family, we have a social life. It's really hard to meet some of those guidelines even as a young person. So my recommendation to you is find things that suit your needs, whether it's a scheduling issue or whether it be an enjoyment issue. So just make sure that you're doing exercise that you can adhere to consistently. And that's all. Thank you, guys.
Lisa. And last we have Dr. Boger.
Hello. So this reinforces my dreams of being a power lifter for the rest of my life. I'm just going to keep on that. This morning at breakfast, we're sitting there, and my 6.5-year-old daughter asked me what it was like to live in the olden days before they invented electricity. And like, well, honey, actually, I'm not quite that old. And my son is like, but you couldn't pick what movies you wanted to watch. And like, that's just foreign to them. This idea that I had to wait for shows to come on TV and all that. And it's just indicative of how fast technology changes and how fast technology is changing. It's exponentially changing its form. No matter who you are, it's hard to keep up with it. So I'm just going to lay that down there, right now. My interest is in technology, as Brody said in my complicated academic bio. Do ask me about it if you're interested. But the gist is I am passionate about how can we build technology that can sensibly support people with their life, the way they want to be supported. Not the way technology designers think it should be done, but the way the people who are using the technology want it done. And so 3 things I think really have to happen and we have to pay careful attention to are looking at supporting people as whole people, not just as a bag of health vital signs. That's number 1. Number 2 is making the technology accessible in terms of building it in a way that makes sense to the people using it. And the third one is equitable access to technology. So I'm just briefly, and I'm going to try and time myself. I know Jen's got the cards and she's going to hook me off. So I'll try to stay on time. So the first topic, she's already stuff. She knows me. I can start ranting when I want to. The first one is about creating technology for holistic living. We are not our vital signs. And for most people, health and vital signs is a means to an end. The things that make us feel fundamentally human are our passions. That's what makes us get up every day, not stepping on a scale to see if my weight has gone up. That's not what makes people jump out of bed, That's something we need to look after for sure, so that we can then engage with the rest of life. So I enjoy exercise as a hobby, but not everyone does. But we can all recognize that it's important. There's a role in technology there as to how to make, as we've heard from our panel, how to make exercise, for example, accessible to people in a way that drives them and makes them want to engage with it. But likewise, there's a massive role for technology to support us in things like hobbies, As we've seen in the pandemic more than ever, it can connect us with people, even if we're not able to physically be somewhere, which is really important. It can get us access to services, knowledge. Citizenship is a huge one. And like it or not, as our society is moving more and more to this digital online backbone, we need to make sure that it supports all the aspects of being human in a way that makes sense to all the different types of humans who are out there. So not just the 20 or 30-year-olds who are building it, but for all of us. And that rolls into my next point, which is creating accessible technology. When I say accessible technology, again, this is technology built for the people who are using it. So this has been a bit problematic because you see a lot of tech is overbuilt to the people who build it. Like everything else in the world, including art, including everything, it tends to be in the eye of the creator a bit. And this is not always intentional. It's often with the best of intentions. But the real truth of it is you have a bunch of 20, 30, 40-year-olds, usually male, usually highly educated, higher socioeconomic. They're the ones building the technology. So they have their lived experience, and that's what they know best. So naturally, technology tends to reflect their perception of the world. Now, we're trying, and increasingly so, to do things like user-centered design, person-centered design, co-design. All these things are terms for reaching out and involving people from the populations we're designing the technology with as team members on the tech design process. So we're trying to reach out and incorporate other people's lived experiences into the technology. This trend is increasing, which is encouraging, because the result means that the preferences, the abilities, the value systems, all these things that are really actually very hard to capture, like how do you capture values into technology? That's something I study. It's hard because everyone's values are different. But you need to have technologies still that can support them. Otherwise, the technology doesn't have value to you. If it doesn't have value to you, you don't use it. If the writing on the screen's too small, you can't use it. If you have dexterity problems and the buttons are small, you can't use it. So even things that could be quite helpful, if you can't use it, it's useless, right? So this is the idea of accessible technology. And the last point is the idea of equitable access and equitable technologies. This means people can actually get their hands on it. So this is another big thing where, again, we're rolling into all these digital applications and healthcare, access to citizenship, access to news, and even access to services. It's all going online. If you don't have the internet, you're at a massive disadvantage. That's just the internet, let alone the devices that can access the internet, and then the training on the devices and the confidence to use them, and then to actually find the stuff that you're looking for, and to know it exists in the first place. This is a really tall ask. And I don't think we're doing enough. In fact, I know we're not doing enough to support equitable access. And if you don't have equitable access, then you are marginalizing that population. In my opinion, internet access should be a right that every Canadian certainly, but globally, it should be a human right, a fundamental human right. Because if you don't have access to the internet, you are automatically at a massive disadvantage. Whether you choose to access it or not, that's a different story, but you should at least have that choice. And so I think, especially thinking about aging, there's a lot of people who simply can't afford the internet, or they live in a place where it's not easy to get at, or they don't have the resources to know how to get online. Yet so much of healthcare delivery, as we've heard, is going online. This seems to me a real problem. And when we're thinking about, again, turning it back to the topic today, aging in place, For me, aging in place means aging with choice. And to age with choice means you have to be able to know what's out there, be able to use it, and have it work for you. And if those things don't happen, then it becomes a lot more complicated. And I talk to a lot of technology developers who are, young, spry, well-meaning 20-year-old sort of types. And even older, actually even like, middle-aged people who are in the tech industry, and over I hear again, well, it's a problem now, but, that's just because this generation didn't grow up with technology, and when their time's gone and the next one kind of rolls in, this problem will just go away because, I'm just like, but they grew up in a time where when they were 20 and 30, they had cutting edge technology that was not available in their parents' time. And I already know that when I'm like 70 or 80, and because I've power lifted my whole life, I'm gonna, be living independently, and my grandkids are gonna be like, Grandma, just think to the house, just think to it, and it'll just like, it's not that hard, and so the point is, because technology is dynamic, we can't just assume that it's going to adapt to us. We need to make it work for us. We are its creators, it is our tool, so it's up for us to find technology and build technology that works for us. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Jen. Yeah, just reflecting on that, I have my kids, when I was young, we all know what a rotary phone is. My kids are of the age, they don't know what a rotary phone is. They see one and they're like, what's that? They don't know what a push-button phone is. What's that? Because it's all cell and digital using their mobile devices.
So on that one, if you guys ever Google, I'm trying to remember the title, there's a actual kind of like online show where they give kids stuff from like the 50s and 60s and ask them what, the rotary phone one is great because they're looking at it, and then they ask them questions on how to use it. So they throw in, how would you send a text with the phone? And the kids are like trying to dial a text message, and they're like, it's a trick question, you can't. And the kids are all like, what? And like the busy signal, is that the one you saw? There's like a busy signal. They're like, what do you think this means? It's like beep, beep. And they're like, it's not connecting to the tower, And they're like, no, it means someone's on the phone. And they're like, okay, so, and they're like, you can't talk to them. They're like, well, why not? And they're like, well, what do? You're just like, you just gotta wait till they're done, and they're like, what? You just keep calling back? They're like, yes. And they're like, their minds are blown. This is completely unacceptable, and just, So yeah, if you, yeah, it's worth watching if you can find it. It's awesome.
We could spend the rest of this evening talking about this tech. One other that I'll mention quickly before we break is video stores. My kids are blown away that there used to be video stores, because why would you go to a store to rent a video? It's all on the internet right now, you can stream it. That concludes our panel this evening. We have had some great perspectives from Tiana talking about physical activity and aging and some of the psychosocial factors in aging, and interesting methodology using the photo voice. And we have Lisa talking about sex differences in aging, certainly an important consideration these days, and also on the design of technology that has to be accessible and equitable, particularly for the aging population. And I talked about virtual health and rehabilitation. So with that, jot down your notes and your questions. We will break now for 10 minutes. If you do get up from your table, please be reminded to put on your mask. I think there are refreshments. There are snacks at a table over there. So feel free to get up, and we will reconvene at, 5 o'clock. Thanks, everyone. All right, everyone. I think we'll reconvene the Café Scientifique. and go into the second part of the program, where is the discussion and the question and answer period. And this is really your opportunity. So if you have questions, I encourage you to ask them. If you also have different thoughts about aging in place, or your experiences of aging in place, and you want to share it with the group, and that might facilitate discussion, I would encourage you to do that as well. And I forgot to mention, this is a multidisciplinary panel, but I forgot to mention the different perspectives, the disciplines that we have here. And so Tiana, her background is in psychology. Lisa, background is in kinesiology, health and exercise science. And Jen, her background is in engineering, computer science, ethics, everything, all of the above. And my background is in the health and rehabilitation sciences. Okay? Just to put a little bit of context behind the discussions that each of us provided. So, I'd like to open it up to the floor. And we do have runners with microphones. Jen has a microphone right there, standing in the back, and she'll go around and pass the microphone to anyone who has a question. So, oh, yes, I love it. 3 questions right off the bat.
So I'll hold the mic, that way we don't have to pass it around.
Hi. Question, actually 2 questions. Is there technology right now that we can access on our phones? And as we get older, is there technology will grow with us? Like, so in other words, we don't have to download another app. Is it user-friendly type thing? So that's my 2 questions.
That's a great question. I'd like the same thing. So anyone who has a phone, anyone has experienced this, where you go to use your favorite app and they've updated it. Oh no. And then like the interface changes, everything's in a different spot, you can't find things, it won't log on for you anymore because something went weird. This is not just a frustration with aging, this is a frustration with technology. And this balance between the idea of having to have things fresh and avant-garde and up to date with the latest trends in both the look and feel of tech, but also in terms of the backbone underpinnings of what you can do with it. And then there's this need for consistency in terms of design, so that if you update it, half your users aren't lost and rocking back and forth in a corner because now they have no idea what to do with your program anymore. Another thing that's happening right now that's really good is we're finally kind of understanding not all people are equal in terms of what they like and don't like and are able to do and not able to do. And the real kind of piece that's happened is it's a big change in thinking in the way tech's built. Because up until very recently, technology was relatively static. You built a thing, say a chair, that's it, it's a chair. It's not changing anymore until it breaks or you take it apart again, right? That's it. With digital, now it's completely malleable. And the other thing was, when digital first came out, humans really had to change how they think and did things because its capabilities were so small that we had to figure out how to make it work in our lives. It's only the past less than a decade, in all honesty, that technology has become powerful enough that we can now, with digital technology, truly design it to be kind of whatever we want it to be. We're coming to this, the sci-fi, the sky is the limit, is now starting to become our reality in terms of what's possible from a technological point of view, but also in terms of from an interface point of view, what we can make the interface look like and do. And so what's happening now is there's a big push toward, okay, well then how do we make the interface and the functionality of the technology map better to all the different abilities and preferences of people out there? So I think what you'll find, hopefully, over the next few years is a lot more ability to configure the technology in the way you'd like to see it, font size, color schemes, all these things, but then also have the ability to say, actually, I don't want it to change over time versus it does. So that's something that people are aware of and are kind of working on now, because first of all, they've realized it's a problem, but secondly, because it's become actually possible to do. And there's actually a lot of work starting now in, for example, artificial intelligence and things we looked into in my own lab, of looking at how people are using tech and then trying to see if we can autonomously self-adapt it to what that person is trying to do with it, as well as their ability to use it. And the idea there is you kind of take away the stuff they're not using to declutter it, but also as their abilities might change, for example, if someone gets dementia, then you're simplifying the functionality and the interface over time so that they can still use that app that they've been using for so long without overwhelming them with choices and like hidden layers and things that are more complicated. So that's the long answer. Hopefully that was an answer.
Thanks, Jen. Yes, I think we had a question here with the woman in the red, and then Jen, we have a question in the back there.
Hi. I have a comment and a question. My comment is I spoke the other day to a young person, probably mid-40s, and her job is to work with users of her business's computer programs only to find out how people navigate through and if it works well. I thought, well, wouldn't that be wonderful if the government hired a person that would work with the users and find out if they could use the equipment or the programs. So my question is for Lisa. I'd like more information about powerlifting. Are you talking about doing more reps with less weight or doing reps faster? Like, what do you mean? Can you just talk a little bit more about powerlifting, please?
Yes. That is a great question, because I'm not telling everybody to become like an Olympic powerlifting athlete. And you're exactly right. It's about how quickly you perform the exercise, so not necessarily the heavy load of it. So for example, if I'm doing a bicep curl and it's 3 or 5 pounds, and usually you'll do a bicep curl with the same tempo, so you go up and down, up and down. What I'm saying is that how quickly you do it on the way up, you go out, squeeze, hold, and then you can lower it down. So it's varying the amount of how quickly you perform the exercise. Does that clarify things a little bit? Okay.
Thanks, Lisa. And then we have another question at the back there.
My question or comment is, we've had 2 years of COVID, and I have 2 elderly relatives that are 94, 88, in different care facilities. They used to be assisted living, but during the COVID season where they've been locked down and locked up in their room for periods of up to 6 weeks at a time, where they didn't see anybody but somebody coming in with a gown and mask and slipping in food on a paper plate and plastic cutlery, and then they came and collected garbage once a day. So they went on with this for 6 weeks at a time, 3 times at least in the 2 years. Now these 2 women were both very mentally with it, very independent, walking about. They now are quite debilitated, I'd say somewhat dementiated, because they're not orientated to place, time. They seem to be quite angry because they just don't know how to cope with things anymore. Is this now that COVID is slowing down, and I know in Alberta, one lives there, they've lifted all the restrictions. Is this something that is reversible now, that they can come back to their mental state they were previous, or are we stuck with them lost and deteriorating? It's
a great question. And And I'm sorry to hear about these situations. I think your relatives are not the only ones who have gone through this experiences. And with COVID and the social isolation when we first started, social distance, social isolation at that time when we first started, and physical distancing was the thing. And so we had to be by ourselves. And it's unfortunate to hear about these situations that your relatives have gone through in the past couple of years. In the context, I'll put my comments in the context with the caveat that I'm not a clinician or a health professional, and so I can't provide clinical guidance. I could provide thoughts. I would say, considering the age of your relatives and what they went through during COVID with the social isolation and lack of the social support that they might have. It might be challenging for them to regain some of that capacity, cognitive capacity that they had before. Certainly, probably not impossible. There are certainly therapies out there. I don't know what the therapies are, but you could certainly speak to, some therapists, OTs, or social workers or psychologists even, and talk to them about programs that might help recover some of the cognitive capacity that they had before. Not a great answer, but again, I'm not a clinician, and so I'm hesitant to provide any further advice. It's a great question, and I'll open up the floor to that question, because there might be some expertise in the audience here that can share similar experience, or have some guidance, if anyone would like to, or even for the panel members here if they have any thoughts.
I can only contribute to what the lady at the back is saying. I have a 89-year-old mother who lives on her own in a house, and she is feisty, she is determined, but one of her complaints is that it is extremely lonely living on her own with COVID and not being able to socialize, not being able to even go out and go for dinner or have anything to do. So just because you're in a nursing home, it is more isolated, I agree. But even living on your own during these times is very difficult as well. So I think we all have a little bit of suffering that we've had to endure, and how to get out of it. I think that's the individual person who has to try to figure that out. That's all I can say.
I would agree as well. And there's a new health condition called long-term COVID, right? So people who have had COVID, they're dealing with all these longer-term health issues that are associated with COVID. Those are the direct effects of COVID, right? Some of these indirect effects of COVID, social isolation, physical distancing, I mean, those are areas that are significant as well that we have to consider. And in health and rehabilitation, we always like to provide evidence-based practices. And I think this is an opportunity for scientists at UBC and at other universities to really develop a better understanding of some of these implications, because COVID, first time in my life, hopefully the only time in my life, if we develop an understanding about how to approach it and how to respond to it after the end of it, we need that science. And that science could inform us for future events like this. Hopefully it never happens again, but we never know. Thank you for those questions. Jen has a comment.
Hello, there we are. I just wanted to add to that, and it's a small silver lining, but one thing COVID has done is it's really pushing us to think about our systems and how they're not adequately supporting us. So that has come through loud and clear, and having a lot of colleagues who are in long-term care research and who are gerontologists in long-term care, like they were blowing the alarm bells were ringing like over a decade ago, and no one's listening. So I mean, to your point, like it's infuriating that this happened because we knew it was going to happen in a way. Like if there was a pandemic, we knew what would happen, and then it did, and then everyone's like, this is shocking, and it's like, but we knew that was going to happen with a pandemic. So I think it's really causing us to think about, well, what do we actually value as societies? How much money are we actually willing to spend on things like systems that are adequately supported, as well as just like having innovations in things like technologies that can hopefully help support better connectivity for people who are isolated, so that beyond COVID, some of these learnings can hopefully be truly embraced. And I mean, I won't hold my breath, but you know, hopefully some of these learnings will actually trickle through to actually make post-COVID a better, more connected place where we're taking hard looks at these problems and actually trying to fix things that we know aren't going so well. So, for example, with tech, a lot of people's tech proficiency went up a lot out of necessity. And a lot of people, especially a lot of like older adults in my family, for example, my mother-in-law, we were just talking about this, she can use Zoom like no one's business. She can order her groceries online now. She was doing her book clubs, and you know, and she's like, as soon as COVID's over, I'm going right back to how I was doing things before COVID. Like, this is just like, you know, this is a means to an end. But to the point, she'll never unlearn that now. You know, and now she's living in Toronto. She has been the whole time. We can now do Zoom calls with her, no problem. Whereas before, it's like, we're not going to try because we're going to spend an hour trying to get your microphone to work. So, you know, there's things like that that have happened. But that said, you know, that's for the people who can afford it and who are willing to roll up their sleeves and just bite it and do it. You know, like it wasn't her choice, but she's just practical, and they have the money, honestly, that they can get the internet, they can get an iPad, they just need the willpower, and being cut off from her friends and family, that was enough for her to roll up her sleeves and just do it, you know. But not everyone has that attitude. So yeah, interesting times.
Hi, I'm Bev. I have a question about this technology thing. I had a back issue a while ago when I was seeing a physiotherapist. She sent me home with a connection to exercises I could do at home, and also I found lots on YouTube, so forth and so forth. But down the future, if we are going to be doing more health-wise with technology, I'm doing a prescription renewal phone call with my doctor or that sort of thing. I can get in touch with 811 when I have a question about COVID. I can book an appointment to get a vaccine. I can do all those things, but what happens as technology rolls out and we're doing more medical things, and now I'm having trouble accessing the technology because I'm getting confused with how to actually do it? So wouldn't it be nice if there was a component of the medical system that would send somebody to my house and fix my computer? So, I mean, I'm serious about that. So we can use the technology that's going to do good things for us, but not frustrate us and stop us from using it. So, you know, I grew up, there was no computer when I was born. There sure is now. Thank you.
And that's exactly to the point, right? And so that's what, when I was talking about equitable access, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's not appropriate for us to expect people to have to access systems that they aren't able to access. So being able to like get online includes like being able to troubleshoot your computer when it's down. And I agree, I think it's not reasonable to expect everyone to become tech experts with their computers. Because I know I have trouble with mine, And I consider myself okay with tech proficiency. And still there are things like I can't, like, I'm like, okay, you've stumped me, Windows. I have no idea how we got to this place. And, you know, restarting always is usually great help. But, you know, exactly to your point, and this is, again, with someone where you are able to do all these things. There's a lot of people where, you know, the vaccine passports, digital vaccine passports. It's a great example. Not everyone has a cell phone. Not everyone knows how to go download their proof of vaccine, how to take a screenshot, how to find it again, even if they do. But if you don't have that, you can't get into like anything right now. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have vaccine passports. I mean, that's like a whole nother thing. Like, I understand why we want proof of vaccination, but requiring it to be digital in that manner, you are now making the assumption that everyone has access to a digital device and can do that, and then bring their digital device to wherever venue they're going. And if you can't do that, then you can't get in. And so, to me, that's not equitable when it comes to technology, right? Like, now you're limiting people based on their ability to use and access technology, which that's not fair. But, you know, yeah.
Just to add on to Jen's point there about the accessibility, so and to emphasize some of Jen's comments before, you know, when we're developing these technologies, we really need the input of the end user, the person receiving the services, to advise on what's user-friendly and what's not user-friendly, what we like about the technology, how can it be improved. Because if that end user perspective is incorporated at the beginning, well, then all the more likely that they're going to use it when it comes time for them to actually use it. On the flip, I see your hand. On the flip side of that is, yes, there's the consumer's perspective about the technology, but then there's also the clinician's perspective of the technology, right? And so we have to educate the clinician and advise the clinicians on how to adequately use the technology to optimize the delivery of their health and rehabilitation service to the patient on the other end of the technology. So sort of a both. We need the input from both ends in order to optimize any technology or devices that we have. I see your hand. There's another question in the back there.
You're 5. I've got 4 before you. I'm kind of keeping track. You're 1.
Thanks. I just have a question from a systems perspective, which you have alluded to. So definitely COVID has highlighted the fragmentation in our systems in some fashion. And I'm just wondering, what is your opinion around trying to understand either to reshape our system to get our systems working? Is it technology that's going to bring us up to that optimal level? Is it people? Is it, what is it? It's a loaded question, I know.
In terms of, I'll give it a stab to start. In terms of our health system, is that where you're and COVID. So I think our health system did, you know, optimize or did the best that they could do given the resources that they had. What we're seeing now is this new condition, and I've alluded to this before, called long-term COVID. So people are still having long-term symptoms resulting from COVID, although they don't have COVID anymore. And so, you know, with the acute COVID, they went to the health system, they went to the hospital, which is great. You know, our hospitals are certainly set up for acute issues. If I have an injury or I have a new onset of a disease, I'm going to go see my doctor. I'm going to go to the ER, and I'm going to go to the hospital. Well, many of these individuals, they live with their injury or their disease on a long-term basis, right? So they're in the hospital for 5 days. Well, I'm going to live 30 years with this new disease onset that I have. The issue with our health system right now, I think, and rehabilitation system, is that, you know, we're good at keeping people alive, resolving some of the acute issues. We're good at returning people to independent community living, but then after discharge from hospital, there's very little follow-up. And so there's issues helping people manage the condition that they have. What is the potential solution to provide more resources in the community? You know, money is one answer, but as we all know, we have limited resources to go around considering all our other social activities. technology is certainly a solution, as I mentioned in my discussion. Virtual health, virtual rehabilitation, particularly to increase accessibility of a specialized health service. And I'm not thinking only for us in an urban center like Kelowna or Vancouver. It's in these urban centers where there tend to be quite a few resources, but more specifically, people in rural and remote areas, they don't have specialist neurologists. And so how do they receive access to specialized health rehab services? One potential solution as well to get to them is technology. So. I don't know if that answers your question, but sort of one perspective there, that if we consider the health continuum, acute, rehab, chronic care once in the community, the issues in the chronic care right now, I think that we have to address. What are the solutions? I don't know them all, but I do know one aspect is technology to take a look at. But in itself, technology has issues. Any other thoughts among panelists?
Hi, my name's Diane, and I've got just a small short story to tell you about the seniors, regarding this lady back here, the seniors that are in healthcare that have declined, that's too close, over the COVID time. Our neighbor's 98-year-old father had a fall at the coast, and he went to hospital. There was nothing wrong with him, but he mentally crashed, and they sent him home in palliative care. The family gathered round, and because he was in palliative care, they were able to everybody to go in at one time. So over the weekend, on a 3-day period, they were in and out of that place, and they were there. And then they came home, and he was going to have his 99th a week later. So in that week before his 99th birthday, he started feeling better. He started eating, he gained his strength, and when they came back for the 99th, it just continued. And the week after that, he was out for a 2-hour drive in the bus. So if you're worried about somebody that is in a home, rally around them, get to see them, flood them with people. My husband and I, we volunteer for Seniors Outreach. And over the COVID time, we adopted a senior. That's just part of what we do for Seniors Outreach as volunteers. We adopted a senior, and she was lonely and get a little depressed from all of this. So we would go after we delivered meals to her, and we'd sit there and we'd play cards. And she's 100% better now. I mean, her health is still deteriorating, but mentally she's even doing Wordle. Does people know what Wordle is? If you haven't done Wordle, try Wordle. So here she is at, Wordle. Here she is at she's got little technology. We all showed her how to use it. She's doing it, and I get reports every day as to what this is. And we have another one, the same thing. Her husband was put into long-term care, and we visit with her. So if you're really worried, or if you're not, adopt a senior. Go visit them. Spend some time with them. They need it. Okay?
Thank you for that comment. I think one of the common themes that I'm seeing or hearing right now is some of the effects of COVID, but I think COVID really has emphasized it, is the need for social connectiveness. And the need, we're humans, we're social beings. And when we don't have that social connectiveness, that could lead to long-term health and well-being issues. And I think the COVID-19 has really emphasized that. And so moving forward, it's certainly going to be at the top of many people's minds to maintain and how to empower people to maintain that connectiveness, during times of social distancing, quarantining, that sort of, so on and so forth.
Question stems from my inability to write notes and listen at the same time. And you were talking about your coach program. Was that a one-time thing? Is it available ongoing? How do people access it? It is.
Yeah, sure. Great question. And so one of the things as research scientists is to actually translate some of our findings and for it to be made available to its target audience. It's called knowledge translation and implementation of some of the projects that we have. So it's called the Student-Delivered Community Outreach Telehealth Program for COVID Education and Health Promotion. And I was working with a very motivated, very keen group of medical undergraduate students. And these students, they were very bright, they're very motivated to help people. And they saw success in this project. They were coaches, they helped people, and they saw improvements. What this group of students has done now is they've created their own medical club at UBC. It's called the Prevention and Lifestyle Medicine Medical Undergraduate Club. And what they're doing is they're actually offering this coach program to people out in the community. It's actually up and operating right now. And afterwards, I could provide you with more information and links to access that service. The original concept of coach was also to provide COVID education, because at the time, it was during COVID, we thought it'd be a good opportunity to, in a sense, help people with the health literacy of COVID and what to do during COVID, what phases of reopening. Right now, they're not doing that. It's more on the health promotion aspect of the program to help people identify goals that they want, health behavior goals, and then develop action plans that the participants that the people could follow to achieve those goals. Yeah, so to answer your question directly, it is available right now, and the coaches are medical undergraduate students from UBC.
Hi. Some of my questions have been answered, but the one about loneliness and depression, and they go so very much hand in hand. And depression leads to more loneliness because you kind of stop doing the things that you even enjoyed doing. And that's a big problem with people who are isolated. And I don't know what exactly you do about it other than talk to your doctor, whether you do it by in life, face to face. But there was another one about, you said you wanted some input from people who are living alone and are older. I want a robot dog. one that's, cuddly, but you don't have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to let them out.
One that's pre-trained.
Yeah.
That's technology.
Yeah. You never have to pick up behind them, not once. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You don't have to pick up behind them, and they don't eat your shoes. Yeah.
Yeah. But they, you can talk to them and.
Yeah. So there's actually a lot of research being done with robotic pets and their impact on things like loneliness and depression. A lot of work done with robots in long-term care, actually, because that's another place. Like, we know pets provide a lot of calming and, well, when they're not eating your shoes, and but like in general, like pets actually improve people's overall well-being. But they don't usually allow pets in like assisted living, long-term care and stuff because of, just worries around health, allergies, things like that. So they are looking at robotic pets as an alternative where they behave like pets do, but you don't have to worry about them pooping in the kitchen or someone having horrible allergies. You just have to recharge them. And it's quite interesting because a lot of people are just like, oh, good grief, robotic pets, right? And again, I think it comes down to it's not for everyone. It's like every type of technology. For some people, a robotic pet is amazing, and for other people, they're like, that's ridiculous, and that's okay. The point is that we're having, again, more choices about what works for you. And it's really interesting. Has anyone heard of Paro? Paro the seal is at the forefront of robotic pets, P-A-R-O, developed in Japan. And Paro is in a lot of long-term care facilities now and is like the most studied kind of robot for dementia. Really simple, really cute. And absolutely, the technology behind them absolutely locked down. You cannot, like, if you want to, like, use Paro for a different application, they're like, no, the code is completely locked down, completely secret, and it's like, how hard can it be? It's like a seal. But it just goes to show that, the people who developed it feel they put a lot of work into try to make it realistic, where Paro does react to when you pet it, and it reacts to when you talk to it. And so it's not just like, a wind-up toy, but much more dynamic. So if, but they're not cheap. Again, this equity piece. But, if you win the lottery, Paro is maybe an option.
Tiana, do you want to talk about the loneliness piece?
Yeah, I guess you make a really good point in terms of the loneliness being very intertwined with things like depression. And you're right, it becomes kind of a loop where they feed into each other. And we see this kind of relationship, well, like I talked about a lot, I look into physical activity, but even when we look at things like loneliness and physical activity, we see a bi-directional relationship. So where people that are more lonely engage in less physical activity, and then also people that engage in less physical activity are more lonely because different health behaviors like physical activity tend to be social, or they get you connected in some way. And so I guess to break that loop, kind of what we're looking at is what is important to people. And something we've been looking at with our COVID data is specifically areas of growth is what we've called it, kind of trying to take some sort of positive spin from this whole experience and asking people, like, after pandemic times, what's something that you will take with you, and bringing it back to technology. But a big thing has been things like Zoom, where it gets you connected with other people, even if it might not be the same as face-to-face interactions, it still is one of those interactions that I guess fuels you in a positive way and reduces that loneliness. And that is something we're looking at right now, is that just the raw number of social interactions that people have per day are associated with higher mood and feeling less lonely, and that doesn't necessarily have to be face-to-face. So that can be things like calling someone, or having a Zoom chat, or taking a socially distanced walk. So I feel like, yeah, kind of those small changes that are maybe intertwined with other health behaviors can have a really big impact. But yeah.
Can I just add quickly, though, like, we have to be careful that it doesn't act as a replacement, which I think, it's like, if you can't access in person, if that's what you want to do, then this is like, at least it gives you something that's better than nothing. But I think all of us who have been on Zoom for 2 years too is like, I'm so sick of Zoom, like, no more Zoom. But I mean, I'm glad it was there. The alternative, as we've heard, of just sitting by yourself in your house would have been far worse. But that said, like, it doesn't make up for going out to dinner with a bunch of your friends. So I think, again, it's using it sensibly, right? Because there's other psychosocial impacts technology can have that are different from in-person human interactions. So.
Yeah. And I would also say that we have, like, looking at the data, we found that in-person, face-to-face interactions still have the strongest relationship with things like feeling less lonely. But like you said, it's not a replacement, but kind of a supplement, I guess, for times when you can't have that in-person interaction, or which applies outside of the pandemic as well, if people are facing health problems, or who knows what the future holds. But yeah, it's more like a supplemental tool.
Point very well taken about the loneliness aspect and some of the mental health issues that could lead from loneliness, and also the use of a pet to overcome some of that. There's actually a program at UBC Okanagan called the BARC program. Can't remember the BARC's an acronym, can't remember what it is, but once dogs pass a BARC training program, then they're on campus and students can take them out to help with some of their student mental health issues like stress and anxiety, because there's some research out there that shows pets alleviate some of these mental health concerns, specifically among students.
I have a question building upon this concept of loneliness. When I see aging in place through my line of work, I see a lot of older adults, seniors living alone in their often family homes or their place of residence, and this can create a lot of loneliness, especially when you have isolation such as the pandemic. So where I'm going with this is, are there any other countries, are there initiatives being looked at today that perhaps in Canada we could follow, or that researchers are inspired by? For instance, in Latin America, it's common to have multicultural, multi-generational households. This is a non-technical solution to solving this isolation. Over in Europe, we see a lot of great initiatives happening as well. So I'm curious, from the academic perspective, what other models from other countries are we seeing that we would like to try here?
You might need to introduce yourself, but you can't hold the microphone.
Joan Bator from UBC. I can answer that in part, is that a UBC faculty member and student have developed the program called HappyPad. And we've been helping them grow and support them. And it is intergenerational housing. So older adults who now have maybe an empty house it's kind of like a dating kind of site, only this is for housing, shared housing between older adults and students. So the student isn't, and they're primarily focused on college and university students. And of course, students need housing. And in our community, as you know, we have a shortage of housing. And so the idea with HappyPad is that older adults might be able to share their home with a student. And there can be a trial period. It can be for short term, long term. There's lots of variation. There's no work expectation, like there's no expectation that the student needs to look after the elderly person or vice versa, that the older adult needs to somehow feed the student. But if you're interested in HappyPad, there is a session in Embrace Aging, and Kayland, who is the originator of HappyPad, and it's originated here in Kelowna, is going to give a presentation on HappyPad. And it's become, over the last 4 or 5 years, it's been taken up in other centers across Canada because of the shortage of student housing mostly. So if you're interested in it, I'd encourage you to come to the session on HappyPad. But that's one type of intergenerational housing. But I think this idea of shared housing is a great concept.
There's a few more questions, but before I go on, I need to acknowledge that Dr. Joan Batorf is the leading force behind Embrace Aging for the past 8 years. So thank you very much, Joan. My running shoes. Okay, well, why don't I go here first?
Okay.
You can't hold it, though. It's my mic.
Sorry. I haven't seen much change in the neuropsychological testing, over the last 30 years. And I have a question regarding medical assistance in dying and choices in terms of living with depression and designer drugs. So are you familiar with the functional MRIs for determining those kinds of decisions in Canada, or?
Is that a question for me? No, I'm not.
For anybody, like, it doesn't matter if you're in Stanford or, Montreal Neurological, they're all the same. They haven't advanced a hell of a lot, but with the cancer and the oncology and the heart issues, there's some advancement in choices in terms of decision-making, both legally and medically. And I'm wondering, how do you feel about that, and how does BC actually compare to the rest of the world?
I think it's a good question. I don't have any insight on that, unfortunately. But again, Joan has come to save the day.
Sorry. I can't really answer your question, but I can tell you that at UBC Okanagan, we have a colleague, actually in the School of Nursing, who's doing a lot of research in this area medical assistance in dying and is one of the leaders in Canada. So her name is Barb Pessett. I'd be happy to give you her contact information, Dr. Barb Pessett. But we are leaders in that area. It's a developing area for sure, but Canada is a leader in terms of supporting people in those decisions. So some research is certainly happening here. We have some very strong researchers, including UBC.
These are the type of questions where our family doc would have been provided some insight, but unfortunately Janet, as I mentioned, wasn't able to join us tonight.
My last question is, with aging, so many of the people are suffering with macular degeneration, so they can't see, and they don't have the dexterity, like they can't see keypads and that. And between their hearing, lack of hearing, or inability to hear and see, what does the technology do for them? How can they, is it all voice generated? Is there something to help these elder people that don't have the tactile, the eyes, or the ears?
Yep, excellent question, and there is. So voice recognition technology is leaps and bounds, and it's advancing really quickly. So that's one it's handy to everyone, honestly. Part of a barrier to that has been training. So it's been trained a lot on younger adult voices, which means older adults, and particularly if you have a morbidity, if you have dementia, if you've had a stroke or something like that, it really falls apart because now your speech gets altered, it can't understand what you're saying. However, because so many older adults are finding it handy to use, the database of older adult voices is growing and the speech recognition capabilities are improving like a lot. So that's opening up for a lot of people. There's also a lot of technologies now with new hearing aids where instead of going to a speaker in the home, it goes directly to your hearing aid. So a lot of people who do have hearing problems now, their phone, their Alexa, whatever, you can hear it again, or better anyway, because it's directly in your hearing aid instead of ambient. And speaking to it, again, is getting a lot better. But it's a great question, and it's not just aging, right? Like, again, it's this question of accessibility and accessible technology and developing it so that anyone can kind of use it. There's also starting to be like better brain-based technologies, honestly, where you're able to do more of that. But that's like, we're safe in terms of like, that's like 30 years away before we have to really worry about technology reading our brains in an everyday sense anyway. Right now it's a very big choice. You have to put on a lot of electrodes before, and you'd probably know that you were doing it. So, but it's just like, it's the interesting question of technology where there's a lot of possibility, and there's a lot of possibility for good, and there's a lot of possibility for misuse and harm. And we just have to figure out how to try and reap the good without going too far into the harm. And an interesting debate there is just the speed, right? Technology is trying to get pushed out the door fast, and sometimes before we've really thought carefully about how we're using it or what impact it might have. So that's a really big debate right now in tech design in general, is about when and how we should use it, and trying to figure that out a little better before we just unleash it on the world.
We are at about 8 minutes to the hour. This discussion has gone by really fast, and it was really an engaging discussion, so I want to thank you all for that. Before we go to the concluding remarks, I'm going to invite the panelists for a quick concluding remark. Lisa, I just have one quick question for you about sex differences and aging. In my line of research in stroke recovery, our research, and the stroke incidence is about 50-50 between 50% of males and 50% of females experience a stroke, so it's roughly the same. But in our research, it's very male dominated. In a lot of our studies, we see 75% of the participants are male and only 25% are female. And so this has implications as to how our research results can be generalized. A lot of the emphasis on the results is male-dominated. And so in your line of work, I'm just wondering if you're seeing something similar, or are you able to recruit equal number or representative numbers of males and females into your study that's representative of the population?
I think with older adults, it's harder in general to recruit for studies. As far as do I get more males or females, I find that females are more prone to volunteer for studies regardless of age. But what's funny is that a lot of research out there is primarily only males, because it's easier to control for hormonal imbalances through cycles. So does that answer your question?
Than what we see in the stroke world. Excellent. Thank you so much for the discussion and for the question and answers. Thank you so much to the panelists. Before we conclude the session, we're going to have a quick 1-minute concluding thoughts by the panel members. And maybe, Tiana, we'll start with you. Some of the salient points reflecting back on our discussion today.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest takeaways from this discussion is, I guess, how active it was. Everyone had a lot of really great input, and everyone has really important things to contribute. And I think from a research perspective, that's really exciting, because what we are trying to do as researchers is really get diverse, capture the diverse experiences of different people, whether that be their experience with loneliness or experiences during the pandemic, or just diversity in physical activity. And I think, yeah, a big takeaway for me would be that if you have the opportunity to participate in research, that's great. And we are interested in kind of all walks of life, so you don't necessarily have to be what you might think of as an ideal candidate for physical activity research, where you're running regularly or you would consider yourself particularly active. We're really interested in all experiences, and that's just really important, I think, for all of the work we do as researchers and physicians and everything. So yeah, that's kind of my final remarks. But thanks.
Thanks, Tiana. Lisa.
I just wanted to say thank you, Brody, for moderating this whole panel. You did a fantastic job, so just shout out to you. Yeah, I'm thoroughly impressed with the panel and the audience member. I felt like I was attending this event as like a learner. I definitely learned a lot from just the panel and the audience members asking their questions. So that's my biggest takeaway. All of the technology discussions and about loneliness, I had no idea. And so that's really, really interesting. My recap is making sure that you guys take things and apply it to your own life, what we've learned today, because there's no really like one size fits all for everybody, whether it's about exercise or technology or how you start to process your loneliness or depression. Everybody has different ways of doing things in their daily life. So maybe talking about it to other people to see what they do, and then making that your own and how that adapts in your life. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Jen.
I echo. I thought this was a great panel, and I had a lot of fun. And you know, if you have more questions, like feel free to come up after and talk to us, because we love to talk, obviously. But also, I'm going to take the challenge one step further. And you know, some of the biggest advocates of change and volunteerism are older adults. So aging with choice. That's aging in place. It's aging with choice. And if the choices available to you are not working or they're not there for you, start to like push back, you know? Like if the system being handed to you isn't working, this isn't working for me, you know? Start pushing for equitable internet access. Things like this is stuff that we as a community can do to level the playing field. Like, okay, you want me to do online rehab? Give me a computer, show me how to use it, set it up, you know, like we need to also let the system know what we need from it instead of just passive recipients. So, you know, go flip up the table and like, you know, make aging in place what you want it to look like as well. It's your journey, so it should be one that suits you. So thanks for coming tonight, and yeah, thanks Brody for moderating.
Thanks, Jen. Just really quickly, a couple of takeaways from me is the importance of choice, not only because that's the last thing in my mind, but choice is very important. And the other point is the social connectiveness. I think there was a lot of discussion about that. And to be honest, I think we would have discussed that in the context of non-COVID. So even if we weren't in this pandemic right now, I think the social connectivity would have been an important topic as well. That being said, that concludes our session today. Thank you so much, Tiana, Lisa, and Jen. Thank you, audience, for joining us at this Café Scientifique. And we encourage you to attend other events scheduled during the Embrace Aging Month. And the handout is available on your table. So please take that home with you. And we encourage you to attend other aging or Embrace Aging activities. As I mentioned before, an evaluation form will be emailed to you. And we encourage you to complete that evaluation and submit it as well. And the organizers would be very appreciative of that. And last but not least, big thanks to Joan Botoroff for leading the Embrace Aging Month and for leading this Café Scientifique. Thank you all.